All right. Hey, I haven't really I haven't really recorded a speech or anything in front of just like a camera, but before I've done it on Zoom plenty of times, and I've done it in person even once for a graduation ceremony. But this is a new experience for me. So I don't really know how to do things. Also, I can't really gauge reactions, so every time I give a joke, I'm gonna just kind of pause for 5 seconds awkwardly and just sit here until I guess to give you time to laugh. But anyway, launching right in. When I think about my life, my relationship, my idea of the Lord has developed over three main periods, three main struggles that I've faced in my life, each mainly spiritual, and they've all revolved around a different aspect of myself that I've had to overcome to get to the place that I am at now. So, the first spiritual battle happened when I was a child, and it centered around the crippling illness known as obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. It had a huge impact on how I interacted with the world, rendering me unable to behave in a normal way. Whenever I touched something with my left hand, I would touch it with my right, and vice versa. Whenever I walked, all my steps were measured in fours, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that kind of thing, and I would be constantly doing things like avoiding cracks on the sidewalk or stepping on certain colors on the floor. At the height of my illness, my mind would conceive that wherever people moved, they would be this invisible wall that I could not walk through. This would cause me to walk around in seemingly erratic paths and use the longest possible route to get to a spot 5 feet away. That's not really a joke, I don't know. I'm not going to pause for that. OCD is like a voice. It's like a voice in your mind that's constantly ordering you to behave in strange, irrational ways, and the more you obey this voice, the stronger and louder it becomes. For me, as an 8-year-old, OCD had gained almost complete control over my life. I was entirely helpless to resist, and the only person who could help me was God. God. Now, before this point, I had never really needed the Lord. Yes, He was a part of my life, but if you went and entirely removed Him, it wouldn't have had any large impact on how I perceived the world. Sorry. Water. This changed when my parents brought me to a Christian behavioral therapist to help with the illness. Suddenly we started praying for my healing. Suddenly we started memorizing verses to help me fight against the voice in my head. Suddenly God became more than just a concept. His Holy Spirit became an active force in my life, the general leading the army in the war against my mind. And this is how I developed my first impression of the Lord. To me as a child, He became my rescuer, my liberator. He freed me of the oppression of my mind and allowed me to live a life independent of the influence of OCD. He helped me learn to capture every thought and make it obey Christ, as we see in the Bible in 2 Corinthians 10:5. I am indebted to the Holy Spirit for allowing me to live life the way that I do now. Now, OCD is not actually the only mental barrier that I've faced in my life. My experience as a teenager was largely characterized by another, more common illness, one which many of you are probably familiar. Attention deficit disorder, or ADD. Now, what is it like living with ADD? Well, there are a number of symptoms, including short attention span, difficulty focusing, hyperactive behavior in some people, and some other symptoms, but for the most part, I could live with it. Unlike OCD, it didn't really cripple me. Well, unless, of course, it's an online meeting, in which case, oh boy, it can be hard to focus. I have to focus on this block here and none of the stuff around me. It's tough sometimes. There it is. Okay. But in a normal set of circumstances, no, I already read that part. Ignore that. When you have ADD, all math becomes ridiculously difficult. I once again read the. In a normal set of circumstances, ADD is fine. up until you sit me in front of a piece of paper and ask me to find the equation of a quadratic. When you have ADD, all math becomes very difficult. Even the most minute calculations can take entire minutes because you cannot bring your mind to focus on the task. So what's the solution? How do you try to be actively successful while dealing with ADD? Well, as any reasonable person would, I turned to drugs. Okay, so now that that joke is out of the way, I should explain that I'm referring to bifenton, not cocaine. Bifenton is a drug specifically designed to increase one's focus, but unfortunately, while it may not be addictive like cocaine, it does have a pretty nasty side effect, which is basically turning you into a zombie. The majority of my school experience involved me sitting at my desk, staring into space, basically being a lifeless husk. I had no personality, which made it extremely difficult for me to do any socializing or even just find friends. I call this period of my life the Dark Ages, not just because my hair was very long and kept getting into my eyes, making it very hard to see, but also because I was going through a lot of crap. I was experiencing a ton of anxiety and depression and just horrible thoughts, and it was a true rock bottom in my life. It kind of met its crescendo between grades 11 and 12 when I had just felt this deep emptiness. Like, all throughout the last 4 years, I'd been calling on God, asking Him to help me, pleading for some kind of escape from my tribulation. And, like, honestly, He was my lifeline. The only reason that I continued day after day to get up in the morning. But despite the strength of my faith, I had never actually really heard something from Him. The only time I actually felt some semblance of His presence was when I was at Crow's Nest Lake Bible Camp, a yearly event that had continuously renewed my faith every year. But that year was the final year that I would be allowed to attend. After that, I would no longer have that source of life. I knew that something would have to change this time, or else my faith might not survive, and I, by extension, might not. And this is where God blessed me more than I could ever have hoped. First, He showed me that there were others going through what I was experiencing. We had a discussion at camp where people shared their stories, and I realized that what I had felt all these years was not my burden alone. Because I saw that I was not alone in my pain, I no longer felt that I was the one who had to bear this pain. I could recognize that it wasn't really completely, it didn't have to be my burden. The day after the discussion, as I sat out alone in the wilderness, reading my Bible surrounded by trees and birds chirping and with massive mountains on both sides, I finally cried out to Jesus and allowed Him to take my pain, release me of the burden I had been carrying all this time, and set me free. The depression, the anxiety, the guilt I didn't even realize I had all melted away, and I felt truly free for the first time possibly ever in my life. Jesus was my rescuer. So with that, we reach the final chapter in the story of my life. If OCD and ADD were the antagonists of the first two chapters, then social anxiety would definitely be the villain of this one. To give you an idea of the kind of thoughts that went through my mind at that time, I'm going to share with you all a pretty interesting story. So I have had the pleasure of attending Rocky Mountain Calvary Chapel almost 9 years, and throughout these years, I've gotten to know many members of the church. One person who I'm especially blessed to have known is Pastor Dan Llewellyn, who has made many conscious efforts over the last while to get to know members of the youth group. On one occasion, Dan was meeting with each of us one-on-one to catch up and see how we were doing. The setting for my meeting with him was a coffee shop near our house. Now, I think there must have been an introductory coffee class or something that I missed, because I honestly could not tell you the difference between an Americano and a Frappuccino. However, as we were driving there, I resolved in my mind that I would order a mocha, since I knew exactly what it was. I had plenty of them before, and it felt like a safe choice. We arrived at the coffee shop and walked inside. Immediately, I became so distracted by my surroundings that I was not prepared when Dan finished his order and my turn came. Suddenly, I became pressured not just by desire to seem competent, but also time as the barista waited my request. Unnecessarily flustered despite the simplicity of the task, I rapidly scanned the different items on the menu, searching for something that resembled a mocha. Finally, I settled on something called a matcha latte. 5 seconds. Okay. Figuring it would be safe, since mocha sounded like matcha, I placed my order and then I sat down at a nearby table. Moments later, a waitress came by to drop off our drinks. My own face dropped like a stone when I saw what lay before me, and two thoughts frantically fired through my mind. First, why is it green? What kind of coffee is green? Second, if this is not a kind of coffee, what horrible concoction have I just ordered? Hiding the horror within, I thanked the waitress with a smile and took a slow sip, trying to appear as if I knew exactly what flavor was about to meet my tongue. As the liquid introduced itself to my taste buds, I had a fascinating revelation. Chlorophyll can come in liquid form. Can you believe it? And as if that weren't enough, soon after I had another almost equally interesting revelation. This is a drink I will never order again. Although my tongue had a terrible experience, Dan had a good laugh at my expense, which I think makes it worthwhile in the end. So, as you can tell, I was not exactly... I didn't know how to do a lot of things. I was... what's the word? I don't know the word. I had social anxiety. So, that has been a very prominent issue in my life for quite a while. It really just social things in general were never really my strength, which is why it's so cool that over this last year, it's amazing seeing the things that God has done. Because first of all, so I am studying public relations at Mount Royal University, which, if you don't know, it's kind of like marketing meets journalism, and you'll have to do, there's some public speaking mixed in there too. So it's something that I've had to, I have to kind of know how to do it. I have to be somewhat socially competent. So it's what am I trying to say? At the point where I was when I first accepted, I was not really... the word public speaking would have terrified me. It terrified me whenever I thought about it, because I couldn't see myself ever doing that. But then God He's opened up so many opportunities for me to develop in that area. First, I got the opportunity to join a club called Toastmasters, which is basically a club for helping you improve your public speaking skills, which involves speaking in front of a bunch of people and then evaluating other speeches. So it's everyone kind of gets a lot of positive feedback. So that's been really helpful. The second thing would be actually my graduation speech. I mentioned it at the beginning, and the story I just told is actually the same one that I told for that speech, and that was just great because it was I was able to get those skills that I was learning for Toastmasters and really apply them to something practical. And seeing an audience of 300, which is about how many were there, seeing them all laugh, that was man, it was really cool. And then the third thing, and I think this is the best thing that has ever happened to me, joining the Navigators. You guys I know, like, I'm not actually right in front of you speaking, which is really unfortunate, but I just want to say, like, I'm so thankful for you, for all of you. Before I joined Toastmasters, I didn't really have any close friends. Like, yes, I did have friends, but none of them were ones that I'd really shared any of my serious thoughts or anything like that. But ever since I've joined Toastmasters, I've gotten to know some of you very well, and I would there are those of you I would definitely call my close friends, and I'm eternally grateful for that. You guys have built me up so much. You've really you've changed my life, and I have no one to thank for that more than God the Father, giver of good gifts. He knows exactly what I need, and he's provided it for me. So yeah, in short, to me, God is the Holy Spirit, the rescuer. Jesus, the rescuer as well. Actually, I meant to say liberator for Holy Spirit, but you know what I mean. And God the Father, the giver of good gifts. That is what he means to me. I could not be the same. I would not be at all the same person I am now if not for him. I'm eternally grateful for that. I'm so thankful for everything he's done for me. Thank you. Have a good night.